My name is Dr. Danielle Twum, and I am a cancer immunologist and currently work as a medical science liaison. I think as a child, I was interested in science. I didn't know it was a term called STEM. I think that the term STEM, I learned about it way later in life. But yes, I was interested in biology and physics. I don't know about chemistry, but I was very interested in biology and physics. I was very interested in how the world worked. But yeah, I've always been interested in anything scientific, but the term STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, as I said, I learned about it way later in life. But yes, I've always been interested in understanding how the way works, and which we've learned now is STEM. So yeah. As I said, I've always been interested in biology. I thought for the longest time I was going to become a medical doctor. And then I went to college and I took one class. And that class pivoted me into research and then later on into cancer research. And from then on, I went into cancer research because unfortunately I lost an uncle to a brain tumor. And I wanted to understand, what cancer was, what this disease is. And so that kind of led me into a path. And the thing about research, which I love, is once you ask one question, it leads to more questions and more questions. And so what I learned in getting my PhD is that a PhD is a very flexible degree. Once you get it, you can pivot it into different careers. Becoming a cancer immunologist made me very malleable. It made it so that I can take my knowledge of how the immune system works in cancer and apply it in so many different fields. So right now I'm working as a medical science liaison, but I have worked as a field application scientist. I have worked as a translational science liaison. I have worked as a business development manager. If they pour you into any receptacle, you can take it because that's what a PhD teaches you. A PhD teaches you how to learn, right? So I think that it's not just going into my field of cancer immunology, it was getting a PhD. It's just getting a cancer immunology degree was the cherry on the top. My all-time favorite class or subject was fashion. I bet you didn't see that coming. Yes, I took a fashion kind of a fashion throughout the ages class as part of my French minor in college, and that was probably one of my favorite classes. But I will say my all-time favorite class was actually the history of sugar in also in my French class, and it looked at how the impact of sugar affected the slave trade, how it affected so many different things. It affected colonization, and how just the thirst for sugar changed the world, and it changed geography, it changed language, it changed the spread of language, changed the spread of culture. And you could literally draw it all down to taste. And so it was a very, very impactful class, and it was taught all in French. So yes, those two classes, the French fashion throughout the ages, and then the sugar, how taste changed the world. Yeah, those are my two favorite classes. I think for me, it's the flexibility of it. And that's a word you hear me use a lot. It's flexibility. I love flexibility. I love the option to try different things, as evidenced by the fact that my favorite classes were not science classes. I also intentionally went to a liberal arts school because it gave me a chance to take classes from different different departments, because I don't think that we should all be boxed in, right? I think we should have a chance to explore our different interests, because I think we're made up of multitudes. I think we're all made up of multitude interests, and we should be allowed to see what our strengths are and see what else we can combine our strengths into greatness. So for me, that's what industry represents. I think in industry, you get exposed to so many ways you can take what you've learned And it gives you a chance to sometimes rotate in different departments to see, oh, I'm kind of sort of good at this. Could I go work here and apply whatever knowledge I've already acquired here and, make it better here and sharpen my knowledge and my skills here? This was the era of when I was very much dedicated into, I knew I was going to leave academia. And so one of the things I was trying to practice was when I was interviewing for jobs in industry, one of the things I was told was that you had to be able to talk about your work in 3 minutes, because sometimes most elevator rides are short. And so you just never knew who you would be connecting with, because you never knew when you would network, right? So you just always had to have an idea of your work in your pocket. And you just never knew if you were going to be working in a purely scientific place or you're going to be working somewhere non-scientific. So you had to have a scientific version of your work and a non-scientific version of your work. The 3-minute thesis competition was a challenge to have a non-scientific, and when I say non-scientific, I mean you had to have a summarization of your work without any scientific jargon. So imagine talking about cancer metastasis, which is the spread of cancer, without saying the word metastasis. And that was the challenge, was to talk about your work without scientific jargon. And I couldn't have done it without my best friend. But the thing that freaked her out, I remember, was we had practiced, I had written it out so many times, we had refined it, we practiced it. And I went and took a shower right before the competition, and then I changed it. And what motivated me, number one, because I was about to job hunt, and number two, if I won, the first prize was $1,000. The second prize was $750. And as a graduate student at the time, $750 was my biweekly salary. So if I could win that was a paycheck. That was amazing. Yeah, great motivators, but also it was an exercise. It was a challenge to see if I could talk about my work without falling back on the terms I knew and sought comfort in. I can always talk about metastasis. I can talk about transcription factors. How do you talk about transcription factors to a 12-year-old? Yeah, that's why that was a fun exercise. So that's why I did it. I think scientific communication is critical. I mean, seeing as we just came through one of the most deadliest pandemics in recent history, to our knowledge. I mean, we're not going to talk about the Black Plague and everything else that has come before us that we know historically. We saw the breakdown of scientific communication. We saw misinformation fly rapidly because of the internet. We saw a tool that was created to spread information be misused to spread misinformation. I think in addition to scientific communication being used to restore trust in science, it should also be used to educate the general public, and also be used to allay fear. I think at the base of everything is fear. I think once people understand how things work, it's less scary. And I think for me, I said at the beginning, biology is comforting. And the reason why it's comforting is because once I know how something works, it's less scary. And I think that for a lot of people, fear is at the base of believing misinformation than anything else, in my very humble opinion. What role do I think scientists have to play in it? I think scientists are trying their best, but without the support and necessary resources, they can only go so far. I think that a lot of scientists tried on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. They tried. I have friends who tried and they argued until their voices were hoarse, but if you're not getting enough resources from the government, if you're not getting enough resources, you can't get your message across, right? And so it has to be a concerted effort from those in power to try and get the right and correct message across to help allay fear. Fear is what makes people lash out. It's fear. And science exists so that we are not scared. For me, science is why I usually am not scared. So, that's my little moment. So I can talk about two very cool things I've done in the past. My first role at graduate school was a field application scientist. And a field application scientist is somebody whose one foot is in the lab and one foot is in the lab of another company or another lab. Yes, it was a very interesting role. It's a role that mixes lab work and a lot of customer-facing opportunities. So basically, what I did at Levitas Bio was that Levitas Bio had a machine at the time that separated cells based on their density. Back when I was in graduate school, if you wanted to sort cells, you had to use antibodies. And these antibodies, you had to put them on the cell. And most of the time, what this does is that it can change the physiology of the cell. So what Levitas Bio was working on was a way to sort these cells without putting anything on it. So by just using the inherent density of the cells. And that used just pure density because everything has mass and volume, every cell in our body, and different cells have different mass and volume. So what I would do was that I would go and install the machines in different labs all over Northern California. And I would broker kind of like a collaboration with the labs. Usually the labs would have like different cell types that we didn't have access to. And I would run experiments in those labs and then get data of how our machines were behaving and then take that back to Levitas Bio. Levitas Bio is based in Menlo Park in Northern California. And that's what I would do. So it gave me a chance to kind of work with other people and hone my skills of communicating science because I had to talk about the machine. I had to learn a lot about the machine, but I also had to work with people that are not my office mates, right? And so it helped to be able to talk to people and learn about the types of cells they had so that I would know how the cells could potentially behave in our machine. And so I had to learn different cell types. And so that was my role. And being able to work with magnetic levitation, I felt like I was working in a cartoon. That was just so strange. But yeah, I learned a lot. And, being able to transition from graduate school into industry, it was like putting on new clothes. It was putting on new clothes that were my size, but it was made of different material. And I just had to get used to it. There was a learning curve for sure, because I was a startup, so things moved very, very fast. In a startup world, you are talking to the CEO at least once every 3 days because the CEO is asking you, and what about this? And what about this? And so they're asking your opinion. They're asking your scientific opinion. So don't say anything you can't back up with science. That was what was very interesting. And sometimes they would ask you, well, do you want to try this? And if you say yes, they're like, okay, order it, try it. Be prepared to present it next week. That kind of fast-paced kind of environment. So yeah, that was kind of how it was in the startup world. Working for Genoskin was different because Genoskin was actually a company that took human skin, actual human skin, whenever patients donated it when they did a tummy tuck. Whenever patients did a tummy tuck, Genoskin took the skin and they made these round things and they kept the skin alive in their proprietary matrix. And the skin is human. So you can inject it, you can UV ray shock it, you can put topical creams on it. Anything you can do to the human skin, you could do to the skin. And what was really really cool was Genoskin was based in France. So I was in the US working for a company based in France. That was my job. Yeah. So at Genoskin, I was a business development manager. So I was kind of like I was in sales, but I was also a scientist because I had to understand when I would reach out to companies, I would usually reach out to their chief scientific officer or like their head of research, and we would talk about the science they were doing and whether Genoskin fit into their scientific, project and plans. And whenever we would draw up a research plan, we would have to go through whatever experiment they wanted to draw. And I would, with our chief science, with our head of research, we would have to see whether the the experiment they were proposing was feasible or not. So then I had to also use my scientific chops, right? And these are all positions that are available to someone with a PhD. I didn't know that was a thing that you could do when I was growing up, right? So right now, I'm currently in between jobs. I recently just finished my tenure at Blueprint Medicine. I will announce my next place soon. It depends. If I don't have any early morning meetings, then I usually wake up and deal with emails. And then depending on the plans I have, I usually do outreach to doctors I'm trying to set up meetings with for either the next week, or I try to set up meetings as much as I can in advance because doctors are very busy. They're seeing patients. And so I try to be, I am respectful of their time and their calendars. If I do have a meeting, and it's a virtual meeting, then yes, I get dressed just like I have, and then I do a presentation, or depending on the agenda, sometimes it's either I'm presenting my company's pipeline to them, which is a pipeline is the portfolio of the company's molecules in development, the drug molecules in development that we have, or the approved drugs that we have. Sometimes also I am connecting either the doctor or his clinical trial staff to our clinical trial staff, and I'm the liaison. I'll bring those two together, and I'll just be sitting there. And then if there's a follow up, I'll make sure I write down what the follow up is, and I'll check in with them the next week to make sure their follow up was done. And then of course there's internal meetings to go to make sure that there's training and all that. If I have to travel, that is, most of the time I prefer traveling super early in the morning. There's less likelihood of my flight being canceled because of where I live. And when I travel, sometimes it's for conferences. And so when I go to conferences, I'm taking notes. When I go to conferences, I don't just go to the conference. I go to conferences also to meet doctors, not just to meet doctors I know, but also to meet new doctors. So if a doctor gives a presentation that's really, really impactful, and I think this doctor would be a good collaborator for my company, I go and try and do an introduction of myself, try and get a meeting with the doctor. So there's a lot of putting yourself out there, and having thick skin, and you have to follow up. You have to follow up. So yeah, that's my typical day. Oh yeah, and then I guess at the end of the day, depending on the day, I'll go to dance class. I mean, as a medical science liaison, what I enjoy doing is knowing that my work, even a little bit, brings access to healthcare for patients, because my job as a medical science liaison is, helping build relationships between oncologists and pharmaceutical companies, right? And so that kind of relationship means that we're helping serve patients that might not even know about a particular treatment option. We're finding out about patients that are being left behind. And so we're collecting information about, the clinical decisions of oncologists, and hopefully that's helping determine drugs that need to be made to help, help patients that need the treatment. And also in these conversations, you learn about different communities, you learn about their needs. And so then it helps in coming up with educational initiatives, right? I got into cancer because my uncle died of a tumor when he was super young. I don't think he even hit his 35th birthday. So I don't want anybody to have a story like mine. And so that to me is why I do what I do.